Welcome fellow members of the Esoteric Order of Gamers. The wonderful people at War Cradle Studios sent me this starter set for Dystopian Wars. It's called Hunt for the Prometheus. I've already unboxed it on this channel. In this video I'm going to build all the miniatures in the starter set, and it's a beautiful selection of steampunk ships. So let's get right into it. After this, of course, the next video will be painting the ships, but for now, let's build them. The first thing I'm going to do is give the resin figures a bit of a wash. Resin figures sometimes have a bit of residue on them. I'm not sure if these figures do, but just in case. I'm getting a bowl with a bit of lukewarm water and some detergent and getting an old toothbrush, and with that I'll give the figures a bit of a light scrub all over. Just don't press too hard, you don't want to spoil any of the detail or damage anything, but it's just enough to get off any residue if it's there. After you've done that, rinse them and put them aside to dry. When you're ready to start building, make sure you download the Getting Started PDF from the War Cradle website. Now there's also an assembly guide, but that gives you all the different combinations of how you can build these. If you want to keep it quite simple and just start with the recommended figures, just get the Getting Started guide. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Get yourself a nice pair of clippers. These ones are from Redgrass and they're really good. And you can see there's a few extras that come on resin sprues like this, so carefully cut them out, making sure you're not cutting any detail from the actual piece. I'm starting with the Prometheus itself, which can also double as a Hypatia class generator ship for the Covenant of the Enlightened. There are two factions in the starter set, the Covenant of the Enlightened and the Commonwealth of Russia. When you've cut out your pieces from the sprue, you might want to do a little bit of cleanup. You can see there's knobs of resin remaining, and you'll do this with your plastic pieces as well. Use a nice sharp scalpel and make sure you cut off those knobs, and be very, very careful with your fingers. Try to always be in control of the blade, don't use too much force, and make sure your fingers aren't in the way if anything goes wrong. Just slice off those little extra nubbins. And also there might be some very fine mould lines as well, which you can scrape off with the edge of the blade. Once you've done that, it's always a good idea to test fit your pieces where they'll go on the final model. That just gives you an idea of how everything's going to look before you start getting the glue out. Now you can see there are spaces on this model for weapons and generators. This is a shield generator ship. We've got a whole selection of generators on the sprue and also weapons. These particular ones are particle beamers and these ones are pulse emitters. You can start cutting some of these out of the sprue to see what they'll look like on your final model. Now I'm not going to actually glue these on because I want these to be interchangeable. If I decide I want to change the weaponry, I want to be able to change between them. So I think I'm going to actually attach these little round ones just with tiny little balls of blue tack when I play. I'll paint them separately, and then if I feel like changing the weapons, I can put a little ball of blue tack in there and they'll stick in nicely for the game. There's a selection of generators that you can put on this model. You'll find them on the Commonwealth sprue. And you can put on any variation of generators you like, depending on which special abilities you're using during the game. They all do different things. Be sure to check out my rules summary and reference, because I'll be describing all the rules in there in a very handy summarized form. Every rule will be in there, but it'll just be a little bit easier to read than going through the book. That'll be available on orderofgamers.com very soon. So here are a bunch of generators, and I might magnetize these later on so I can mix and match depending on what configuration I want on my ship. It's time now to start gluing on the pieces of the ship that are going to be permanent, and of course for that I'm using super glue. Resin models you use super glue, and for the plastic models you use plastic glue. Now War Cradle have their own product available for both of these types of glues, or you can pretty much get them anywhere. In any case, don't use too much glue. You don't want it squirting out and making unsightly blobs of glue on your model, so use just enough and allow plenty of time for the glue to dry as you place each bit.
Now I'm moving on to the Descartes class control ship, and again there are some extra pieces to cut off a sprue. Some of these pieces have already come off this sprue, and again give them a bit of cleanup. There's some fine mould lines on some of these pieces, just give them a scrape. And also be sure to clean up any extra bits of resin that aren't part of the piece. There may be little bits of what's called flash, leftover little bits you can clean up. This ship has the three pieces at the back, the smokestacks and the shields. They're the same as the Hypatia ship, as is the top generator piece. Then there's this tube piece that fits in here. Now this piece is quite interesting. As you can see, it fits over the top there, but because the resin is a little bit malleable, you want to bend the sides in slightly so it fits in place. It'll snap in place, but it needs just a little bit of a bend. You can see here that those long sides are slightly bent and it fits perfectly in place. This strange thing is called a Physeter construct, and it's a short-range squadron. You might have to carefully cut out that little nub on the tail section so it fits cleanly together. Just hold that together until it dries. There's a crane arm lifting that Physeter construct out of the tube, so fit that in the slot provided. And once that's thoroughly dry, you want to attach the construct to that one little point of contact on the end of the crane. Now, because superglue is no longer as fast drying nor as strong as I'd like it to be these days, I used a little bit of green stuff, which is this blue and yellow putty you mix together into green, and I took a tiny piece of that and attached it to the top of my construct piece, added a bit of superglue as well, and then attached that to the crane. This makes the joint a little bit stronger, and it also keeps it in place while the superglue dries. You can use a scalpel to clean off any excess that squeezes out the sides. And there it is. The construct is obviously lifted out of the centre of the ship by the crane and then placed in a tube for deployment. How strange. Time for the Commonwealth now, and we've got this lovely resin ship with its wooden planking, its deck. This is called the Borodino class control ship. There's a couple of resin pieces to stick on, the central turret or tower, and this collection of smokestacks at the back. On the sprue you can find these heavy gun batteries, and of course these can be interchanged with other weapons, tri-rail guns and rocket batteries. I'm going to magnetize them all so I have plenty of choice for how I set up my ship. So while we're here, let's look at how I magnetize them. I've got some rare earth magnets here. They're 5mm by 1.5mm, and I've got a 5mm or possibly 6mm wide drill bit, and I'm just drilling by hand, widening the hole there so I can fit the magnet in. Do this very carefully. You don't want to spoil any detail on the model, but remember this is going to be covered up by the weapon, so it doesn't matter too much. And just test it as you drill by putting the magnet in the hole and making sure you have the right depth. Of course, the most important thing with using magnets is that you keep your polarities going in the right direction. So I use a permanent marker to mark the side of the magnet that I want to use, and I keep this consistent throughout my project. Be very careful, because digging out a magnet after you've super glued it in place is a pain in the neck. So you really want to make sure that the polarities are all facing the same way so you can use any combination of weapons. Always double check this, and the best way to do it once you've glued the magnet in place is to get the rest of the magnets and make sure that it's pushing away. In other words, the polarities are wrong. If you do that with all of them, you can test to see that they're all going in the right direction without actually sucking the magnet up out of the superglue and back onto your stack of magnets. So here I am supergluing a magnet in place, and I've already decided ahead of time that the mark I've placed on the magnet will always be facing down into the model. Now of course I want to magnetize the weapon, so first I will get a scalpel and cut off the nub of plastic that previously attached it. Using the scalpel, or I could use a much smaller drill bit, I'll make sure I get a hole, tiny guide hole right in the middle. So this will be a guide for my larger drill bit, and make sure I don't go swerving away from the center. Take your time, and of course be very, very careful not to go too far. You don't want to break through the other side and ruin all the detail. Once again, check the polarity of your magnets. This super glue has dried, so it's safe for me to test that they attract each other. And then I put a mark on the magnet to just make sure I don't get confused, because sometimes when you're putting the magnet in, it can twist around in your fingers and go the other way up before you even know what's happening. And then it's a disaster, because again, you have to dig it out and change it around. So again, check and double check your polarities and make sure they're correct before committing. Once that's glued in, you can turn it over and rub it against a flat surface to make sure that it's well seated in there and that it's flush. In this case, it's still sticking out a little bit. I wasn't happy with that, so I decided to dig it out and dig that hole a little bit more before it dried. And this time it's much better. There are all kinds of ways to handle your magnets, but be very, very careful with them. Make sure small children or pets don't go anywhere with them, because they can be very dangerous. You might also want some metal tools around and some non-metal tools so you can manipulate them without them sticking, or in fact sticking if you want them to. As you can see in this case, I put it on the end of a blade and then I can slide it into place. But again, be very careful with them. They can be dangerous and they should be treated with respect. But it must be said, there's nothing more satisfying than a well magnetized model. They clip into place, you can move them around to point them at targets. You can... Hold on. Surely, no, don't tell me. Oh no, this polarity's wrong. I can't believe it. Well, you can see it works fine with the models. It's just that weapon. It just goes to show that despite all my warnings, I can make mistakes too. Well, it took a bit of effort, but I dug that one out. Luckily, it wasn't too dry yet, and put it in the right way round. So there's a salient lesson for you. And finally, here's the finished ship. Now it's time to move on to the plastic figures, and this is the Enlightened sprue. It's got 2 Lovelace class cruisers on it and 3 Merian class frigates. Now of course these can be made in different combinations. There are other classes of frigates and cruisers, but we're following the getting started forces for the Hunt for Prometheus set. As with the resin pieces, you want to do a little bit of cleanup, cutting off and smoothing out the knobs where you've cut it off the sprue, and scraping off any mold lines. Again, it's always good to do a test fit of any pieces just to make sure you know how they go together before you start putting glue on them. Don't use too much glue. And when you press the pieces together, you might want to just wipe a finger along the join to make sure there's no excess glue. There's squirt out. Always good with something like this to put it on a flat surface as well and make sure it's sitting completely flush. So now I'm making up the pieces that make up the main hull of the Lovelace cruiser. And these are really nice models. They fit together beautifully. You'll find it very easy to do if you follow the instructions in the PDF. Now that's the main hull done. These 3 pieces make up the aft of the ship. If you put that on a flat surface, you can see these little nubs fit into those square holes. So put some glue on the back areas there. And then just attach them in place, making sure they're in the right spot. And everything's sitting flat. And there's the main superstructure of the Lovelace cruiser. After cutting out and cleaning up a few more little pieces, I'll put in the stern, this front piece, this little back piece, and finally the weapons array at the top of the ship. Now there are several choices to do this, and it's a little bit confusing because the picture on the back of the box doesn't actually match the Getting Started guide. The ships on the back of the box are set up as Copernicus class cruisers, whereas the ones given in the unit cards in the Getting Started guide are Lovelace ones. So I've gone with the Lovelace configuration. You can choose whichever configuration you prefer. I couldn't work out a way to magnetize this so I could swap them out because it's integrated into the hull. So for these models you might want to choose your favoured weapon setup and stick with it. This weapon goes into here, and that's done. Now of course again there are two spaces for the extra weapons. I'll be putting particle beamers into these two turret spaces. But of course, again, I will leave them loose so I can exchange them for different weapons if I want to in the future. Let's move on to the Merian class frigates now. And there are 3 of these on a sprue. They're very easy to make. They really are just 2 pieces of superstructure, one kind of fin attachment at the back, and then a single weapon, in this case a pulse emitter. So cut those pieces out of the sprue, and as usual give them a clean up. As you can see, putting these figures together is super simple, and in the end you'll end up with 9 of them. Once again, I'm leaving the weapon loose so I can change it in the future if I want. Back to the Commonwealth now, and their cruiser is Kutsov or Kutsov class. It's a little bit more complex and made up of 2 deck pieces and multiple hull pieces. I've laid them all out in front of me, then I clean up all the pieces one by one, and the first thing I do is glue the 2 deck pieces together. Then it's just a matter of attaching the correct hull pieces to the deck. Just check the pieces are sitting flat as you go and they're seated firmly together. And there you have it, the main superstructure is done. I did that very quickly and put it together in one go, but you may wish to have individual pieces dry before you move on, just to make the whole thing a lot stronger. Sometimes if you're not careful you can be pressing the whole thing together and it can suddenly fall apart because it's not all dry. Finally, the turret is made up of several pieces. Cut these out and clean them up. You want to glue these 2 tower pieces together. Make sure they're perfectly lined up. And then on the flat side there is another tower arrangement that sticks to the side of it. The 2 pieces of the main tower stick together. Now the tower is going to go in between these, so you may want to attach the tower to one piece and then attach the other part of the tower. I decided to attach the 2 pieces together and then just squeeze the tower in between them. This forms the base of the tower. You want this flat edge to go forward, like so. Glue that on and then put some glue around the top of it and attach the tower piece. There's just one more piece to go in and it attaches to the front. And this should just snap in place quite nicely now. You might have to move that tower just a little bit so it gets into the slot. There you have it. A beautiful looking ship. And I just found a little nubbin there I'd forgot to clean off, so I'll just clean that off with a scalpel. Magnetizing the weapons on this one are even easier because I can just attach the magnet to the underside of the ship. Here's my heavy gun battery, and it just clicks into place beautifully. And of course, when you're playing, you can move the turrets so they're pointing at your target. This is particularly good when you're setting this up because if you do the weapons first, put it in place, all you have to do then is superglue the underside of the ship, take your magnet and just let it pop into place. Let it dry and you're done. There's one more ship to go, the Rurik class frigate. It's super easy, it's only 4 parts. There's a deck piece, 2 side pieces and a turret. Hold those edges together so they get a nice clean join. Actually, it's 5 pieces. The turret is made up of 2, so pop those together. Make sure they line up. Now there's a little trick to attaching the turret. There are 2 pipes coming out from the deck and joining the turret. And you may want to cut back these little pipes on the turret just a tiny bit, little shave, just to make it fit. Not sure why these don't fit exactly, but just a little bit of shave on those 2 little pipe ends and the turret should fit very neatly onto the deck of the ship. Just pop it in at an angle so the pipes meet together first and then push the back down. And there it is. You should end up with 10 of these frigates. Don't forget, of course, to cut out your templates. There's a lot of extra plastic here that needs to be cut out. This bit out of the middle of the main template. There's another piece out of the middle. These are quite thick nubbins, so be careful when you're cutting them out, and you will have to sort of shave down the leftover bits. And then these measuring rulers are attached by quite large pieces of plastic. You might want to use a knife for this. Again, be very careful with your fingers. Cut it a few times and shave off the resulting bits of plastic. Do the same for the round turning template at the end. And then there'll be a whole bunch of nubs to clean off on the backside of the main template. You can clean them off with some clippers and then shave them down with the scalpel. When you're shaving those bits off, don't do what I did. I accidentally cut off one of the little nubbins that you measure the movement by. Not a huge problem, but just be careful. These easily clip together. You might want to wait until you paint them before you do this, of course, but you can, with a little bit of effort, take them apart again. But it's a very effective measuring and movement device. And that's it. Here's the final fleet in all its glory. As I said, I'll use little bits of blue tack to attach those round weapons. The other turrets are magnetized, and this is all ready for priming and painting, which will be the topic, of course, of the next video in this series when we do some painting and get these fleets ready for battles on the open sea. Dystopian Wars, the Hunt for Prometheus starter set. As you can see, you get some fantastic models in the set. Really looking forward to playing this game. Thank you very much to Warcradle Studios for supplying me with this set, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much for watching. That's the Esoteric Order of Gamers, orderofgamers.com, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Bye for now.